Welcome to Inside the Skev, and I'm your host, Aaron Maslyansky. Today, I'm here with Kathy Tate-Bradish and Michelle Jordan. They are both here representing the League of Women Voters here in Evanston, and they are involved here. They've been involved with the League of Women Voters, which is an important organization that really has its roots here in Evanston. And we're going to be talking about the history of the organization. We're going to be talking about the graduated income tax that Illinois is proposing to have passed in the fall in the elections, and a little bit about what they do and why they're here. So Kathy and Michelle, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us, Aaron. It's going to be fun to talk about this.
It is going to be fun to talk about this. And Kathy, the way that we met was because I recently joined Rotary International, and you saw my name come up, and it's just, and then we started talking, and it's just so funny how everybody is so connected. And I think that what's so cool about the Skokie Evanston area is that we have people who are so interested in helping save the world or do good things for the world. We're all do-gooders, right? And there's so many, if you start to get involved in this, you realize you're all connected somehow. And I think it really steeps in the tradition of the towns. So, how did the league start, and, how is it, tell us a little bit about the connection with Evanston.
The League of Women Voters U.S. was founded in 1920, and so this is a very important time. It was actually founded in Chicago, and it was designed to sort of buttress the newly passed 19th Amendment. And so we have, Evanston. We've have a history of activism from the 70s, surely, I would say, right? Where we were super involved. And I think, the group of women that Kathy and I got to know when we first joined the league in the 90s, early 90s, were people who, women who most of them didn't work outside of the home, right? And they were working on very important issues like fair housing and economic development with their little children toddling around behind them. And then Kathy and I came along as sort of the next generation, and embraced the issues that they had studied and researched and came to consensus on. And then there were new issues, obviously, that came about, and obviously this is a direct through line to where we are today, focusing on the graduated rate income tax. So we have strong roots of being so close to Chicago, but we also have that national buttressing right there nearby.
And we have, so the same core group of women who worked on the 19th Amendment, which passed, then formed the League of Women Voters in order to help women figure out how to be more involved in the electoral process. And by the way, in the 1970s, we opened membership to men, but decided not to change the name. And I wouldn't say that LWV is as well known as NAACP, but for the same reasons, even though we've moved on in language and in membership, we've kept our same initials. And Evanston is the home to a lot of very activist women as well, who were part of that. So we have one of the oldest local leagues in the country, in part because we were involved in the founding of the National League. So a long history here in Evanston.
A very long history.
The other delightful part is that there are now groups of high schoolers who call themselves the League of Voters, right? And so they take the women part out, and it's a lot of very activist young men and women in the high school space, and obviously activating, being activists on different subjects of their concern. So.
Right, and I think you Michelle, you touched on this, that the league changed from basically women who were homemakers to professionals, and I think that's just the change in how society has happened. But the two of you are very involved in things going on in the world. Michelle, you've been involved with the Democratic Party in Illinois for for many years. You have a background
Evanston,
in
actually. Yeah.
well, and that, okay.
I'm just recently, last night, in fact, termed off the board. So I am no longer president. We just had our elections, and we have the new group coming in. So yeah, we are nonpartisan, but the league is nonpartisan, but very political. We care about a lot of issues, and we encourage our members to be politically active. We don't tell them, and that's why it's so crucial that we research and study things before we take positions. And there does happen to be some overlap. The shared values of me as a Democratic leader coupled with, the league. But there are also issues that overlap with other, Green Party and the Republicans. So the league is nonpartisan, but very political.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think the importance is making sure people have a voice. And it doesn't matter, how you vote. It's, do you vote? And do you have the opportunity to vote?
Yes. And whether there are obstacles to voting.
Michelle, would you agree? I think our motto is really promoting an engaged and informed electorate. That's sort of the core mission of the League of Women Voters. So we study lots of issues. We're only allowed to take a position on issues that have undergone what we call the study process. But we host candidate forums, we register voters. So getting people engaged in the process is probably our biggest core value, but then also informing on issues that we've taken up and studied over the century.
Yeah,
so democracy is not a spectator sport is one of our mottos.
Right. No. And education is very important. And Kathy, education is very important for you in the professional work that you do. And, I thought was very cool that I see that you teach sex education in Kenya in order to be able to, help reduce unwanted pregnancy or reduce disease and all different types of things. And, again, like I mentioned that once, you're involved in one of these things, you could be involved in many of these things. And I just recently finished up a fellowship with the United Nations Association where we had a fellowship in working with Kenya. So it's so fascinating that there's so many overlays. And, is that something that you started while working for the league, or was it before, or how did that begin?
Well, I've been a league member always as a volunteer. So yes, we're working, but we're not, there are only a couple of paid staff positions. Sure. And none of them are in Evanston.
They're in Washington, right?
Right, exactly. Well, and the state of Illinois, the state league has an executive director in the national league. So state leagues have paid executive directors because it's a full-time job. You can imagine the advocacy on all kinds of issues, not just graduated income tax. So we're making a lot of noise about that right now because this is the very first time in the decades that the league has been advocating for a change from the flat tax to a graduated tax. This is the first time that the legislators voted to put it on the ballot, and that had to happen. That's a necessary but not sufficient for us to get this, right? But that had to happen, and this is the very first time it's ever happened. So we've been down in Springfield really excited. We're sure we've got enough legislators to pass it, and it doesn't get called for a vote. The first time I did this was in 1994, and it has never been called for a vote until this legislative session in 2019. So that's why we're excited about that. But so I've been in the League of Women Voters since 1988. I've been a member and, more active, less active, but I bring a school teaching background. I've been a middle and high school German teacher and also a middle school English teacher in Austria. I've taught in a few different countries. So I have a teaching background. And I'm a lawyer, like Michelle. We're both lawyers. I'm not a practicing lawyer and never have been, but I'm really interested in advocacy. So I bring the teaching and the advocacy pieces together in Kenya, which is another of our overlaps, and what my organization does, what our organization does, is train local rural Kenyans. I mean, everybody's local to someplace, right? But
Mm-hmm.
rural Kenyans, we train them, mostly farmers, a lot of community health volunteers, to teach the behavior change curriculum that is based on making sure everyone is well steeped in comprehensive sex education, but it's a behavior change curriculum to reduce HIV, other STDs, and also early unwanted pregnancies among middle and high schoolers. So that's a passion of mine, and so we have an international NGO based in Kenya doing that work, but and I'm usually there 1 or 2 months a year. COVID, I won't get there this year, but this is the 17th year that I've been doing this, and the first year I haven't been in Kenya.
Wow.
But anyway, so here I am, graduated income tax.
Yeah, well, exactly. And, I think it's the fact that we are all, have to basically stay where we are. But you still have to educate, and you want to have an educated populace. So whether it be around the world within, issues that you deal with in Kenya, or, graduated income tax in Illinois, I feel like there's many different ways that you have to shift in order to be able to educate the populace. So I appreciate you coming on to this show to be able to educate the people that listen to this show to know more about it, because I think on one hand, let's get into it. But, I think on one hand, people hear graduated income tax, higher tax, and they see revenues dropping because of COVID and, the worst economic downturn that we have basically ever seen worldwide. And then you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be taxed more. So what is the truth to that? What actually is happening? What does it mean?
I'm so glad you asked. So as it turns out, and probably this contributed to getting it on the ballot this time, also for the first time, the legislature hammered out the marginal tax rates. They hammered out a tax schedule that will go into effect on January 1 if the amendment passes. And so we can know already whether we're going to be taxed higher or not. That has been passed. So the way it's set up, and pre-COVID, it was predicted by a number of experts to raise about $3.6 billion a year more in tax revenue over what the current flat tax raises. Now that will have plummeted. That lots of things
Sure.
are no longer in the assumptions and predictions, right? So that's all getting reworked now and probably changing by the week. But we know that when the tax schedule goes into effect, that everyone in the $250,000 a year income bracket or lower will pay. Actually, all of those people will pay at least a tiny bit less than what they pay. So it's not very much less, which I will tell you frankly is a little bit of a disappointment to me, but it will be less. And then like 250 to 253,000, you'll pay about the same as what you're paying now because you've gone up into the next marginal rate, right? You pay the same as what you pay now. And then over 253,000, but it's 250,000 in the tax rate schedule, then you pay more marginally up to, if you're an individual, it's $750,000 a year. If you are a married couple filing jointly, it's $1 million a year. And then you don't even get a marginal rate, you get 7.99% on your whole income. So just to back up a little bit, right now we're all paying 4.95% to the state. Whether you make $20,000 a year or $20 million a year, you pay 4.95% of your income to the state of Illinois. So that's known as a flat tax. Very few states have one. It's very regressive. It doesn't allow us to address income inequality. And it also doesn't allow us to tax wealthier people who could take a higher burden at a higher tax rate. So most states have a graduated tax. The federal government has a graduated tax. We'll talk, I'm sure, later, but I hope you ask me lots of questions about things that people say badly about it, because people sit with that, they read it, and then they don't have somebody to ask what's the real answer, right? But we are currently outliers. We're complete outliers. We're one of only 4 states that mandate a flat tax in their constitution. We're one of only 9 states that have a flat tax. Most states have a graduated tax. Federal government has a graduated tax. That's what we want to move to.
So for years, I remember my uncle always talked to me about how flat tax is more fair. And he always thought that I'm sure still thinks that the federal income tax should be a flat tax, because then it's equal to everybody, and it increases incentive for people to earn more money and not take their money offshore. And you look at, years ago, so 1992 with Ross Perot, that was his whole thing, a flat tax. And he got a large percentage of the vote. I mean, it was a long time ago, but there was a lot of, support for that idea. And then on the other hand, you have states that don't even have an income tax. So you get to see, there's been an influx of people going to those states. But here in Illinois, we've had a lot of people leaving. And I'll give you an example. I'm a real estate agent. That's my profession. And I was showing a property to a client of mine who was moving from out of state. This was a couple of years ago. And we go to see a property in Chicago, and he asked the listing agent, why has this place been on the market for 6 months, I think it was. And, the place needed some updating. It was a weird floor plan. Like, that's the truth of it. But she starts going into a whole diatribe about how, Illinois is in horrible financial shape. Our taxes are so high. Everyone's fleeing. And I'm thinking to myself, are we both trying to do the same thing by selling this place, or are you trying to kill this?
You're the worst real estate agent ever.
Yes. So my client's my friend, and we joke about it still to this day. Like, what was she thinking? But that is a perception. And how does the graduated income tax help or hinder the perception? Because perception is very important.
Well, that's the thing. So perception is really important. And the word tax is in the amendment that we all need to vote on. So that's why Michelle and I and lots of other people, there are over 300 organizations in the coalition that we're part of, are trying to get out. Thank you so much for having us on your show and talk about this. So let me say a couple things. In Illinois, we have literally had outmigration every year since 1925. And in 2011, that outmigration slowed down. In 2011 was when we had that temporary state income tax boost. We went from 3.25 up to 5 in 2011. And actually, that was the year that outmigration slowed down. That's number one. Number two, when you look at the 9 states that have no income tax at all, and you compare that to the 9 states with the highest top marginal rates, the states with the highest tax rates have the most GDP growth by a significant margin. They have a statistically significant difference in personal wealth, increase in personal wealth. They have a statistically significant increase over states with no income tax at all in spending. And something else that's really small that isn't grabbing me right now, I often do this with a slideshow, so I'm pulling it off the top of my head. So in other words, the states with the highest marginal tax rates are actually economically, particularly from a GDP growth standpoint, in better shape than these other states. So then talking about people leaving. So first of all of our information that Michelle and I and other organizations use come from peer-reviewed studies rather than stories. Although the stories are, we also use stories, right, tell us how poor you are and how you couldn't get access to the services that you needed for your child with a disability, right? We also use stories. But when we're talking about things like out-migration, in-migration, GDP, all that sort of thing, we use peer-reviewed studies. So there's never been one peer-reviewed study ever that has shown a correlation between tax policy and out-migration. And as it turns out, now people do say that they leave because of taxes, right?
Sure.
And I'm sure that some of those people are being truthful about it. But in fact, there isn't any statistical correlation. When states raise their taxes, millionaires leave, there's not a statistical correlation there. The studies show that people move, and when you think about it, it's just common sense. Like the answers to lots of these scary op-ed pieces about how terrible this is going to be, ignoring completely the fact that we're outliers now, have the absolute worst credit rating in the entire country, fund the percentage state funding per capita of K through 12 students is 50th, and the percentage of property taxes that therefore have to go to schools is number 1, right? So ignore all of that other stuff, the way we're flushing ourselves down the toilet, and we're outliers on tax policy. But people move for common sense reasons: jobs,
right,
family, retirement, and weather. And retirement, believe it or not, because we're all sitting here in Illinois, there are people who like nice weather, and they will sometimes move for it. Yes. But they also need a job or a retirement plan, or they're going to be near family if they're going to move for weather. And so a lot of the states that are attracting, and we look at them and we're like, Texas, Florida, people are going there. They're not staying here because our taxes are so high. Yet no, they're not moving because of taxes. So when you look at the peer-reviewed studies, you see sort of the common sense reasons, right? And we certainly haven't had, we didn't used to have a state income tax. We got it in 1970 in the Constitution, at which point it was mandated to be a flat tax. So out-migration since 1925, mostly to warmer states, and none of that had anything to do with tax policy. There isn't a statistical correlation. Now, people say their tax burden is high in Illinois. It is. Our property taxes are so high.
Right.
And one reason that keeps going up is that our state funding of not just K through 12 schools, but also our higher education system, they've taken the biggest blow, a 50% cut since the year 2000, a 50% cut to our state colleges and universities since the year 2000. And I'll just tell you this, we went in 2004 from paying state taxes paid about 60% of the cost of a student going to college, and tuition and fees covered about 20-something%, right? Yeah. And now tuition and fees, 60%, state contribution, 28%. Since 2004, whoa!
Right. And, I'll speak to that. I graduated. I went to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign from 2000 to 2004. And, I remember, like, when I first went there, I thought I was going to be a pilot. And I was in the Institute of Aviation, and each of the aviation classes, my freshman year, then I decided to go into urban planning. But my freshman year, I remember the classes for flying were like $2,500. So I'm like, wow, this is expensive. And like, and then and I think like the regular tuition was maybe about $6,000. And now you look at it and I don't know, like it's really hard to justify some of those costs. And I certainly want my children to go to college. But it's a different type of analysis, especially if you're looking out of state, because then, I think all these schools are going through a similar thing. And, what's interesting now is that you know, for years, everyone will say that Bernie Sanders' ideas of people being able to go to college for free is crazy. How would we ever fund this? And in the blink of the eye, we you know, have stimulus packages that are trillions of dollars. So how is it possible that we could do that?
It's about priorities. Yeah, it's about priorities.
Well,
Yeah.
And also, so I went to University of Illinois in the 1971 to 1975, and at that time, and so you know, you can adjust for inflation and, you know, population and that sort of thing, right? But think of how it impacts families. At that time, it was hundreds of dollars a semester, and my family, which at that point was so aspirationally middle class that we could smell it. My dad was able to pay out of current income. He was able to write checks to the University of Illinois. And with my job working in the dorm kitchen and my summer job at a factory, I was able to cover all of the other expenses, not a penny of borrowing.
Yeah.
So it, but it isn't that. Our funding of higher education is 50%. Our cuts are 50% higher than the funding drops in other states. We've really slashed and burned there. So it's not that, like, how can universities charge us this much more? It's still, you know, one professor per certain number of students. It's because the tax contribution from the state has plummeted since 2004.
Right.
I mean, we're not just talking about in our lifetime, we're talking about, you know, we already had email and Zoom, and I mean, now it just plummeted.
So let me ask you, with the potential increase in revenues that would come to the state with a graduated income tax, what would that actually cover?
Good question. And it won't cover, obviously it's not going to cover everything. Our
debt's $64 billion.
Exactly. And the bills that we need to pay every year. So statutorily, there are bills that the state has to pay every year. And then we have what we call the core services, which are not really required by law. There's a little bit of a caveat to that, but they're not. So education, healthcare, human services, and public safety are the general fund. Those are basically the core services, and 97% of the tax money that goes in the general fund goes to those things, 96 or 97%. And the rest go to things like parks and, you know, that kind of stuff. And that's the only place that the state is allowed to make much in the way of cuts, which is why they've been doing that. And it's been on an accelerated rate since the year 2000, because they have to reimburse, you know, pharmacies based on Medicaid, and, you know, there are certain things that they have to do, and they've been borrowing money. They have to pay interest back, right? Mm-hmm. So I have absolutely no idea, and maybe somebody does, but I don't have any idea how much now under COVID we'll be actually raising. It's not going to be the $3.6 billion that we had expected over and above the current, right? Because more people are unemployed. In any case, so we all understand that.
Yeah.
And so this can go to both chip away debt, but also it could bolster spending in the core services, but again, necessary but not sufficient. So we've got a huge pension ramp, and we're obligated to pay back the borrowing that we've done because of taking money starting in the 70s. Not funding pensions, writing an IOU and dropping it in their bank account, essentially. And so we owe so much. We're paying more really in debt than actually paying on people's pensions. So that pension ramp needs to be re-amortized, and there are people who have some ideas about that. Now, that has nothing to do with this amendment, which will allow us to move from the flat rate that we have now to put into place a graduated rate. We know exactly what that graduated rate will look like on January 1, and that will get us some more money. There are other things that the state is going to have to do, but none of those will be sufficient without changing to a graduated rate.
Right. I mean, in a way, it's right. It's more, it's, you know, in many ways, it's more fair, because if somebody is making millions of dollars a year, they're able to shoulder a burden that's higher than somebody who's making $50,000 a year. And at, you know, a 5% rate for somebody who's making $50,000 and a 5% rate for somebody who's making $5 million a year is very, very different. You know, it's like, you know, right. For a,
hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, for a billionaire who wants to maybe go and, you know, buy an airplane or like a private jet, or it might be like the same as flying first class for, or no, not even, but somebody who's buying an economy class ticket to fly somewhere. So I think that's something
total financial catastrophe.
Yeah, and so let me add.
$500 away is what I think the studies show, that the average family is $500 away from complete and total catastrophe. We're seeing families now parked on the side of the road saying, you know, we've been thrown out of our house, we have no money, help us. And they're, you know, literally having to ask for dollars on the side of the road.
Right. And I mean, you have situations right now where I was reading somewhere that you may have just a massive amount of people who are going to be evicted from their homes. And, you know, I look at what's going on in the housing market right now, and prices have gone up because people really are valuing a house. But, you know, I can't see how this lasts forever, because if you have a lot, you know, right now there's mortgage forbearance, and, you know, people are, if they can't pay, they could, but they still have to pay that debt. And at some point it's going to come home to roost. And that will be very hard for many people. And, you know, there's going to have to be government support to avoid a catastrophe. So one of the things that I've heard as an idea would be that you charge the super wealthy a tax right now. Because one thing that people say is, well, you know, the wealthy donate a lot of money. You know, Bill Gates has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they donate a ton of money. All these other very wealthy people do. But, you know, there's a difference between a donation and a tax. And the tax is required, and it could be higher, and it could fund these things. So one of the arguments is, say, you know, let's charge a COVID tax. And, you know, maybe it's a federal thing, but the state sure as hell needs it. But then it's because most of the people in the state are feeling a huge strain right now, but there are people who are making gobs and gobs of money. And, you know, make it fair where, you know, we could help redistribute some of it. And people don't like the idea of redistribution of wealth. I certainly don't want my money taken away that I work hard for either. I get it, but we're in a pickle. You know, I think it's like when you look at, you know, what we have to do for our country, I think that it's important that people are together with it. And one of the problems that we have right now is that everybody is so in their camps, you know, whatever type of situation it is, because we don't feel connected to each other. We don't have any type of sense of community because we're all bifurcated. So maybe there's a way where, you know, I think graduated income tax makes sense in many ways because it is more fair in the long run. But is there a way to maybe help do something now for the crisis that we're in? I mean, is that something
good
you're looking
at? No, not at all. But I'll address that. Michelle might want to jump in. So I want to talk about that whole interesting piece that you were just saying, right? Because we want to be fair, and in fact, the organization that we are part of calls the graduated rate income tax a fair tax. So we want everybody to vote yes for a fair tax, even though the word fair tax doesn't show up in the amendment to the Constitution. We say it's fairer. So let me say a couple things. So between 1979 and 2017, so in that period of time, the top 1% of income earners in the state of Illinois had a 254% increase. 1979 to 2017, that top 1% of earners, it skyrocketed. The bottom 90%, so let's forget about that top 10% because in the middle there it kind of switches. The bottom 90% has a net loss since the year 1979, when you take into consideration inflation, blah, blah, the things that smart people know how to do. They've had a net loss. So we've got these, so the graduated rate income tax, whose schedule we already know, only increases taxes over state income taxes over what people pay right now on the top 3%. And the bottom 97%, which happens magically to be people who make $250,000 a year or less, will pay the same or a tiny bit less than what they pay now. So the graduated rates go like that. And so having a graduated rate where the top income earners, and in this case, it's only going to go up to 7.99% for people, for couples who make over $1 million a year, they'll pay 7.99%. We're not even the top. You know, Minnesota is higher than we are, California is higher than we are, but it's asking people, it's asking really only the top 3% of income earners in the state of Illinois to pay a higher percentage than they're paying now. It's not an onerous amount, or not in my opinion. It is very in line with other states with graduated rates and lower than some. And pre-COVID would garner us that extra $3.6 billion a year. Now, the thing about putting in, let's say, a COVID tax on the super wealthy is, of course, it has to, I don't even know, Michelle might know as a practicing lawyer more than I do about this, but it would, you know, if we pass this in November, the graduated rate tax, we'll get probably somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe just under $3 billion more than what we're collecting now, when as people come out of the COVID crisis, whenever that might be, right. That will go up. There are other tax fixes that could happen. The League of Women Voters only has a position. So we studied moving to a graduated rate state income tax, and we did that study in the 70s. So we've been on this through Democratic governors and Republican governors because we believe in fair tax policy, right? And so we've been on that bandwagon for a very long time. But there are other things that have been proposed that the League of Women Voters doesn't take a position on. So we're careful about what we take a position on, and we do what we call studies, which is not a hard word to understand. And so the state of Illinois has almost, and I don't want, service taxes. We tax almost no services. I think we tax a tiny handful, and they're all utilities. So Iowa taxes over 100 services. So if we, and people who are consuming services, people who are paying someone else to do their lawn, people who are paying someone else to cut their hair, right? I mean, there could be a lot of screaming about it, but Iowa has over 100 services that they tax. They're a neighbor, you know. People aren't fleeing Iowa for Illinois because they have to pay a tax on their haircuts. And so there are other ways, not just this graduated rate income tax, for us to get more money. And the big brain thinkers, you know, have ideas about doing that. But right now, the League of Women Voters is in a big coalition to push to get a graduated rate state income tax whose marginal rates we already know, so that we can get more money from the wealthier who can pay more easily. Also, and the CTBA, the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, which is they say bipartisan as opposed to nonpartisan, anyway, think tank in Chicago, has, you know, suggests that we expand
taxes on services.
Other
Yeah.
taxes. We expand taxes on services, right? They've got some other ideas as well to bundle that, but that's their job. What we
Right.
understand is flat tax versus graduated rate tax. Everybody understands it. Most states have it. The federal government has it. We are outliers right now in not having it, and we contribute the least toward our schools in property taxes.
Right. We need to fix this.
Yeah, the other thing I would jump in on is, so Erin, I'm going to push back a little bit about what you said about people being increasingly more tribal. I'm hopeful, and I'm seeing little bright spots. I was inspired by John Lewis's speech, op-ed in the New York Times that we all read on the day of his funeral. I'm inspired. I'm thinking that we are aware of fairness as we have not been in my lifetime. I think that the pandemic has laid bare and made obvious for all of us the inequalities. And so I mentioned before about priorities. You see a society's priorities when we're fighting over very few resources. And we're seeing now with online learning, and if there's not good broadband, if we don't have good access to services, and people who have very little are suddenly people who have nothing. I'm seeing that people are observing these unfairnesses when they're seeing, like Zoom pictures of people on their yachts versus people whose picture is cutting out because they don't have broadband. I think that we are outraged by that. I think that people are becoming activists in ways that they were never activists before on issues of fairness, about safety in the community and what our priorities are about community safety and policing. So I think that we may find ourselves despite being a horrendous pandemic that has, horrible consequences economically and emotionally on all of our fellow citizens that we're losing. I think that this awareness of fairness will make people receptive to a referendum that they might in the past have just ignored or rejected summarily because it had the word tax on it. I think that we are acutely aware of fairness. And I know that Kathy doesn't, like the idea of calling it fair tax. It's, a graduated rate income tax. And it will not say fair tax on the referendum. But that's the cornerstone of what it is. And that's why we, as people who are involved with the League, have a burden to educate people on this and why it is so critically important at this point. I'm optimistic. I think people are receptive to fairness issues like now more than they've ever been in my lifetime. And I'm optimistic. I hope it passes. And I know that Kathy and I are going to do everything we possibly can to educate people and assist them so that they will support the fair tax.
Yeah, thanks so much for this opportunity, because it's a daunting hurdle. 60% of people who vote on because people skip amendments, they, skip all judges, all kinds of stuff, right? But of the people who vote on the amendment to go to a graduated rate tax, 60% have to vote for it in order for it to pass. We have to have a supermajority.
Or a heavy lift. This is such a heavy lift.
Or, and if either of these two things happens, it passes. 50% plus one of all of the people who vote in the election have to vote for the amendment. So, a relatively substantial minority of people could skip it entirely, and it could still pass. Yeah. But it would need a minimum of 50 plus 1% of people who vote at all, or 60% of people who vote on the amendment. If either of those two things happen, the amendment passes. And if you read it, it is for all of us pretty straightforward language, but we understand that it's not straightforward language for lots of people, not, lots of people who are, English as a second language and things like that. And it says tax. So it's a daunting lift for us to get this passed, but all it will do is put us with the majority of states and the federal government in taxing people who have more income at a higher percentage rate, and not that much higher of a higher percentage rate. Ours will go to 7.99. Minnesota's is over 10%. Minnesota's is over 10%, and they were floundering, and they raised their top marginal rates. They now have a budget surplus and the fastest growing GDP, if I'm not mistaken, in the Midwest. And people didn't leave their state.
That's right.
Where do millionaires make their money, right? They mostly make their money where they live, and they stay where they have their businesses and their families. And when they move, as we talked about earlier, I don't want to beat this dead horse, except it's so important. They're just not moving out of state because of high taxes. They're not. Yeah. And that argument gets made and refuted and made and refuted and made and refuted. And it's just disingenuous that certain groups, and I'll say it, like the Illinois Policy Institute, who would like us to have no tax, by the way, they keep putting forth that rich people will leave and our economy will plummet. And we have seen the exact opposite in states. So I told you the success of Minnesota. Kansas under Governor Brownback lowered their income taxes significantly, and there ended up being a case that went to their Supreme Court who said, you are so badly underfunding our schools, it rises to the level of unconstitutionality. You have to put that money back, and they had to raise the taxes back again.
Right. I mean, I think that there's a purpose behind that, where they want to defund the public schools, and they want people to go to charter schools or private schools. And personally, I think that's wrong. I think that public schools should be well-funded, well-planned, because that's how you bring democracy. Because everybody gets a good education. You don't have to be a millionaire to get a good education and have to send your kids to a siloed off school with people who are just like them. And I think part of the reason why America has been great is because we have a diverse culture, and we get to learn from other cultures and other people, and we're better able to operate within the world. And when we silo ourselves off, we are weaker for that. And we don't know how to deal with things. And what happens is, and what you see now internationally, is that we have said, we're going to go it alone. We don't need our allies. We don't need people to, they're screwing us. And, we're just going to be the big bad bully. And look what's happening. We can't figure out how to deal with a global health pandemic because we've got no partners. We are, playing good with the bad guys. And, when
we're a pariah state.
We're a pariah state. Yeah. They don't want to deal with us. We can't go anywhere.
No, we can't.
We can't go anywhere. How crazy is that? Americans can't go anywhere. Our passport is basically worthless right now. And I think that it all starts with the local, and it goes all the way up to the global. And I think that's why we need to really take a hard look at this, and we need to say, yes, we care about our schools. We care about our local governments. We care about our state. We care about our higher education. We need to say that with our wallets. And, a few years ago, there was a referendum in Evanston to help pay for more money for the school district. And it passed with 82% of the vote because people here care. And, I send my kids to the school district.
I spent a lot of time on that one. The Democratic Party of Evanston took that on. And that we thought that was going to be an unbearably heavy lift. But when you educate people, when you let people know how we will benefit, then people support you. And that's why it's so important for the league in this space. Because so often in politics, we just feel like people's viewpoints are intractable and siloed and not necessarily fact-based. But that's why it's so important, the league's voice, because like Kathy said, we studied the heck out of this in a way that was completely without political perspective. It was objective. And, that's why league positions are so valued, is because they are completely and totally fact-based. There is no, siloing or political rancor that plays a role. And that's why it's important, when you hear things from different sides, it's important to look at the league side, because it's always going to be fact-based. Because if it is not, we don't enter into the dialogue. We simply stay out. If we don't have a study to base our consensus and our opinions on, we stay out. And that's why when we step in, listen. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't just, you're not willy-nilly about it.
No, we're not knee-jerkers.
No. I want to talk about a couple other, things in regards to the state, and I want to touch on another subject that I think is very important. But one of the things that I've heard with the state is that, because of this debt and all these unfunded obligations that we have, it's better that we bankrupt the state and we create a new constitution in order to, be able to serve the citizens more than paying the servicers. And then on top of that, you look at things that are going on with the ComEd bribery scandal and the speaker, and people can really start to think, well, where's my money going? And, I'm going to be paying more money, but I'm paying these servicers, I'm paying for bribes. Like, what is going on? Why aren't they talking about ComEd reimbursing the citizens of Illinois? So this is a very, timely type of subject here. So, without getting into things with the graduated income tax right now, how do you respond to that?
So do the bankruptcy response, Kathy, because we just chatted about this before.
Yeah, I'll start. So states are not allowed to declare bankruptcy. And they're not allowed. States are not allowed to declare bankruptcy. Now, they can allow their municipalities to declare bankruptcy. So New York City could declare bankruptcy. But in fact, the state of Illinois also does not even allow its municipalities to declare bankruptcy. No state is allowed to declare bankruptcy. It would have to be, I read an article that you sent me, thank you very much, about declaring bankruptcy, but that requires a whole dissolution. I'm not even sure that that the description was accurate, because states aren't allowed to do it, but it would require that whole dissolution. It would also then get rid of all of the pension debt. It would lose people their pensions, but in any case, it is not constitutional. So it's, a pipe dream of people who don't want to, especially it's a pipe dream of people who don't want to pay teachers their pensions. That's my opinion. It's my personal opinion. I should have caveated first. That is not a League of Women Voters opinion, but we've moved off of our league topic, right? And so it can't happen. And Michelle is the practicing lawyer, so maybe she knows more than I do if there is a go around on that.
Well, I don't think the go around is in any way going to be an improvement upon where we are. I mean, the sentiment that, let's just burn the thing down. That kind of, I never practiced bankruptcy, but the level of scrutiny and it's not a place where you want to spend any time looking at priorities, because then you're going to have to examine the people who are making the determination of what the priority should be when you emerge from this bankruptcy, this fictional bankruptcy. So we have to address right this moment our priorities, our values, and like you said, Erin, you value public education. I think it is the great equalizer in this country. It's something that people can rise and aspire and achieve because of our public education. And so, all of us chatting today hold that as a high priority. I would be deeply concerned if we found ourselves in some sort of burn the thing down and start over kind of situation, to find out what the priorities might be in that circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about, how do we root out, this type of bribery scandal and things like that continually happen, where, you see things going on within states or, Cook County
There are
government.
fines that are associated with there'll be penalties, there'll be, prosecutions. I'm sure that we have not heard the end of all of that.
No.
And yeah. So, I mean, we have a very good Attorney General. I'm optimistic about that. I think that, like I mentioned before, if people are not playing by the rules, we are acutely aware of fairness right now, and that will not stand. I'm on the board of a reform organization, and we called for the resignation of Mike Madigan, and we were not alone. So it's very interesting to see, where all of that will go. And there are some very, very smart people who are looking very carefully at these allegations. And if there is meat there will be prosecutions and there will be penalties. Well, I'm confident.
I think, I think that will help. It'll help with property taxes. I mean, I think that the relooking at valuations and how they were, how commercial properties were assessed with, very high cap rates, which makes the property value lower, did not make sense. I get it, for commercial property owners to see their property taxes jump is extremely disconcerting, especially when their businesses haven't really been able to operate. But at the same point in time,
the pandemic,
right?
Yeah.
And that was before the pandemic, but there's a sense of fairness. So, and then to talk about things, I don't know exactly I'm sure I know what the league stance would be on this, but how do you see the league responding to what President Trump said yesterday, where he started to float the idea of delaying the national elections because of voter fraud from mail-in voting or anything like that? And clearly he's concerned because of his polling numbers, and that is, what besides COVID, one of my strongest concerns is what happens at the election. What if, doesn't matter which side wins, some on the other side is going to be very angry, because I think that there is a chasm. I know that people are understanding fairness, but there are a lot of people who are not okay with this. And then you look at Trump trying to delay the election. What can the league do? What can people do? What can an informed citizenry do to help with this?
Well, we have a really good framework. The Congress decided and created our election, the day of our election. And that is just an unconstitutional sort of power grab by the executive. But it's not the first sort of completely baseless attempt to do things that are unconstitutional by the president. So they've all been, systematically disregarded as the nonsense that they are. So I'm not worried about that. I think you have a really good point about the peaceful transfer of power, which relies a lot on democratic norms. I think going forward, if we're going to talk about sort of the efficacy of the league, I think that our democracy has relied on norms, and we're going to have to codify a lot of those going forward, and I think that the league will play an important role there, because we have studied government, because we care deeply about process and fair process. I think that our comments, as being nonpartisan but very political, will be important to be heard when we go through in the next administration and codify all the norms that have either been violated or threatened to be violated. And I think we're going to have a reckoning, much like we did after Nixon. I think that there'll be legislation that will be passed, and we're going to look at a granular detail at all of the things that all the norms that have been violated and how we can codify them so that won't happen in the future. And I'm looking directly at emoluments, and it's not just other constitutional problems that have come up because of this president. There are so many, and I think the league is going to be weighing in on all of these. And you mentioned about our local situation with bribes. I think every sort of federal violation, we've got U.S. attorneys, SDNY, we've got a lot of U.S. attorneys who are looking very carefully at these violations, and there'll be fines and penalties that go along with that. But I think we're going to be looking in a post-Trump world at a lot of systems and how we can improve them. And the league will have an important voice to be listened to, because when we weigh in, it'll be fact-based. It will not be knee-jerk. And there's going to be a lot of this going on, a lot of evaluation, and it's overdue, certainly.
Absolutely.
And I'll chime in on that a little bit. So first of all, in 1864, in the midst of the Civil War, federal elections were held the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. The elections will be held. Congress, both parties have got no patience for this, and they've been speaking out for this idea of changing the elections. It is certainly worrisome, the attacks on the post office and the appointment of someone with no experience, who's quite partisan, to head up the post office, to possibly slow down the mails, because vote by mail has been extremely successful with very low rates of any proven fraud for a very long time in many states, and it's now more important than ever because of COVID and letting people vote by mail. And by the way, and I know Aaron is going to share this, but you can already be ordering your mail-in ballot. We'll be giving links on how to do that so that people aren't trying when stuff is maybe clogged up, when possibly hours have been cut and there's slower mail service as we get closer and closer to the election, that in Illinois at least you can be ordering your mail-in ballots now, and we'll get them in October before the deadline, which I think October 19 starts the early voting.
Kathy, do you have the website? Can you tell everybody who's listening right now what that web address is? If you don't have it, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, just a second. Let me see if you're gonna, you've disabled screen sharing. It's okay, I'm gonna find it right here. So if you want to register now, you want to request a mail-in ballot, go to ova.elections.il.gov, and Aaron will have this up for you in writing as well. OVA, which is online voter application, .elections.il.gov, where you can find out if you're registered to vote, and you can register to vote. You can request your mail-in ballot now already. You won't get it yet because we don't even know for sure everything that's going to be on it. But if you are in suburban Cook County, go to cookcountyclerk.com, cookcountyclerk.com, and you'll be in the queue to get your mail-in ballot. If you're in Chicago, you go to chicagoelections.gov, chicagoelections.gov. Also, these things are quite easy to Google, and also Aaron, I think, is going to post it below or somewhere.
Yes, so that I'll have it in the show notes, and if you're watching this on video, you're seeing it right now. So it'll all be there, because we want people to vote. It's important. No matter how you vote. It's important to, that is our, I personally, I think it would be so helpful if we all had to do some kind of civil service, whether, not necessarily military, but civil service to each other, to the country. And, one of the things that I think is part of our civil duty is voting, is serving on a jury too. It's no fun, but it's part of our duty. It's part of the deal that you're part of when you're part of a country. It's not so bad when you compare it to other places, right?
Well, and I will tell you, the League of Women Voters stands behind you. We are in complete agreement about that. and there, and so the resources that you're going to be showing on the screen and in the show notes are going to help people get all of that figured out.
Yeah. One question I have, just on this topic is, just why are we doing this by mail? Why aren't we setting up something online that's more secure and easy, where we don't have to have them counted? I asked Jan Schakowsky this too when I interviewed her, and I think it's like after we had the hanging chads with Gore versus Bush. Like, why are we still dealing with this?
Baby steps, I think. We'll get there one day.
We'll get there one day if our anti-fraud can keep ahead of the hackers. So I'm actually very in favor, and whenever I have a choice, I vote on paper. I don't use the voting machine. I vote on paper when I have the opportunity, and to me that feels safer. But not every state has the safeguards in place. Big corporations make these machines. I mean, I'm not particularly paranoid about it, but things can be flipped in a machine in a way that, somebody could stick your paper ballots in the trunk of the car, but the amount of voter fraud, the amount of that kind of voter fraud is so minuscule compared to what, in my opinion, voter fraud is the voter suppression that's going on right now and has been ever since Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was repealed. And that voter suppression of absolutely valid citizen voters in this country is huge compared to the really minuscule times that they have found other, cases of actual voter fraud where somebody votes for somebody else.
Right.
Or
obstacles to voting. I mean, that's something that we're taking a look at from a fairness perspective. Definitely. When you see Black and brown communities in states like Texas or Georgia that have had polling places cut dramatically and the lines are around the block, that is essentially
Wisconsin.
Oh my goodness, yes, yes. It was, and right now, because we're focusing on vote by mail, it's because we don't want people to have to make the Hobbesian choice of health versus your civic duty. That's not an acceptable choice. So, yeah.
So what can people do if they want to learn more about, the league, how to get involved and graduated income tax and everything that we talked about?
Well, we're going to give you more links than what I just said that you could maybe post in your notes.
Sure.
If you're in Evanston or Skokie, we are the League of Women Voters of Evanston, but we also incorporate Skokie. Skokie once had its own league, but it folded in the 1970s. So we do a lot of work in Skokie, and we have many members from Skokie. Our website will be posted, but
Sure.
Anti-Google is great for that as well. You would find us right away, League of Women Voters of Evanston. Then Vote Yes for Fair Tax. That's another website that I'll give you. It's very informative. It's got some cute videos on it, but you can click around and learn so much about the fair tax. And when we say fair tax, what we mean, because there are different organizations in different places, but in Illinois, fair tax means a graduated rate state income tax. And the reason we call it a fair tax is that it taxes people who have less money at a lower rate, and it taxes people who have more money at a higher rate. And remembering that people in those very top incomes, it only will tax people in the top 3% of income earners in the state any more than what they're taxing right now. And those people have seen quite exponential growth in their incomes and wealth since the late 1970s. So that's fair. So that's a fair thing to do. So Vote Yes for Fair Tax is a really good resource. You can click around on it. They've got some cute things and a lot of information. The League of Women Voters of Illinois' website also has a lot of information about this amendment. Remember, the reason that we have to vote on this in the way that we're doing is that our state constitution actually mandates that our income tax be a flat tax. So the Constitution has to be changed in order to be able to tax people with lower incomes less and people with higher incomes more. And so vote yes for fairtax.org, I think. Anyway, Aaron will have all of that information.
I'll have all that for you.
And boy, you're welcome to join our league, or I'm sure your viewership goes beyond, well, we know it goes beyond just Evanston.
Yes,
but
it's worldwide. I look at where people are listening from, and I have all different countries. I'm like, who's listening? Like just random places, but it's global.
Well, if they are U.S. citizens listening in other countries, or if they are U.S. citizens living in the United States, just in terms of voting, non-citizens can actually also join the League of Women Voters. But in terms of for voting, there's all of that information is out there on the League of Women Voters of Evanston website, the League of Women Voters of Illinois website, and Vote Yes for Fair Tax website. So, and we would love to have you join the league. We're a member organization.
And at the very least, if you are eligible and you are able, for God's sakes, vote. I would say at the very minimum, make sure to vote. This is the most consequential election of our lifetime.
Absolutely. It really is. Well, I'm really glad I had you guys on, because I think it's important to talk about voting. It's important to talk about fairness, about the fair tax, and everything else that's just going on. It's incredibly consequential, like you just said, Michelle. And, don't be a bystander. Get involved and learn about it. And, even if you don't agree, go vote. Like, just make your voice heard and learn more. And I think that's the key thing. We can't be ignorant. And when we become ignorant, things can go all over the place. And at least let's make a rational decision when we choose to make decisions. So thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. Thanks so much for having us.
Stay well. Stay safe.
You too.
Wear a mask.
Yes, please wear a mask.